Will Chamberlain, this one is to you to start off with. We were looking at your Twitter feed yesterday, and you tweeted out, "This bill is incredible. It's what I've been calling for." Great work by Greg Abbott in Texas. And what he announced is that they promoted a bill prohibiting social media companies from censoring viewpoints. Will, what is your take on this? Is this effective? Is this going to solve any problems? Is this going to move the ball down the field? Is this going to gain anything for us? What do you think?
I mean, it's got a serious chance of really changing things. That said, like the key thing is to understand like the framework of the bill. So a lot of pieces of legislation and people have been talking about solving social media censorship. They've been focused on tweaking Section 230, or they've been focused on antitrust. And the reason I like this is, and it's what I've been advocating for a long time, is it takes a very simple like civil rights style approach to the problem, i.e., you should have a civil right to be speaking on these social media platforms. You don't currently. But if you create a civil right and then make it judicially enforceable, i.e., you, a user, you're banned for or censored wrongfully, you can walk into a court, get an injunction, and get your attorney's fees paid for. That's the way it works in normal civil rights litigation. That works very effectively to stop basic, racial discrimination. Like people just don't exclude people from the restaurants on the basis of race anymore. It doesn't happen. And partially that's a social norm, but also partially that's the effect of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which created in 1983 cases. So this Texas case does exactly what I've been talking about. Doesn't futz around on the edges. It says you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of viewpoint, and if you do, the user can just walk into court, get an injunction, and get attorney's fees from the company that discriminates against you. Now, will this survive all legal challenges? No, I think there's serious questions about whether it conflicts with federal law or not. And if courts find that it does conflict with federal law, namely Section 230, which gives these companies a lot of leeway to moderate their platforms now, then it might not survive in federal court or some sort of court challenge. But it's the template, right? If we ultimately if we can't do this at the state level, then what Texas has done is shown us exactly the type of law we should be trying to pass at the federal level next time we have the power to do so. And if we get a lot of different states to pass this type of legislation, and then it gets struck down on essentially preemption grounds, federal preemption, then I think next time we're in power, we have a really good shot of getting something similar passed. And it's not the be all end all. I think, just as like discrimination didn't end overnight when the Civil Rights Act was passed, I think you don't get rid of this kind of viewpoint discrimination simply instantly by passing a bill. But I think, it's the right direction. I mean, 230 is futzing around on the edges. It's always been that way. And I'm glad that they're focused on like, give the person who was wronged by censorship a claim against the company.
Darren, sometimes you are very bold in your statements, very colorful in your language, and you advocate strong action. How do you feel about this, this bill in Texas? Is this the right approach? Is this weak? Is it strong? What would you do if you were in charge and this was the issue that you were, charged with solving?
Well, I haven't studied the bill in great detail. Based on conversations with people who have, my sense is that what Will said is generally correct, in particular, the bottleneck being a potential conflict with federal law. As far as the template goes, I don't see anything particularly wrong with it. It's just hard to see. It's hard to get a sense that any of these things will actually ultimately it's a power struggle. And in order to fix the censorship question, you have to subordinate the tech companies. And the tech companies, in my understanding, aren't simply enormously powerful private institutions. It would be hard enough if that were the case. I think in many respects, these tech companies are already extensions of the state, in particular extensions of the national security apparatus itself. So I think understanding what these institutions actually are makes me kind of less optimistic that we can solve the censorship problem through any of these mechanisms. And so it's like there are different approaches that might sound better or worse based on principled grounds, based on, prudential grounds and so forth. But ultimately, they face similar types of bottlenecks. And the bottleneck is the power struggle between the security state and big tech as an extension of that, and basically conservatives who have very little organization and power, who want the right to criticize establishment narratives publicly on these platforms.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that there's an alignment here between the Democrats, the Uniparty, the national security state, deep state, etc. There's an alignment there. How do we break that alignment? That's the issue, right? It's like we have to break that alignment. Do you have any ideas on that, Darren? Because if we don't break the network alignment, then they own it. They're working together in tandem.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to do because the alignment, I think, is more fundamental than what we see expressed at the retail level in partisan politics. And it involves a keen understanding of institutions that aren't even part of our normal discourse. Institutions like, for instance, most people would be shocked to hear that NATO has actually played a considerable role in censorship of the internet. That the Atlantic Council, most people haven't heard of that, and they don't understand why is this organization that's obsessed with pipeline and energy politics to maintain U.S. security state control over Europe. Why is this same organization employing people like Jared Holt, whose job it is to expose and ruin the lives of populists in the United States? These are connections that are hard to make for the average person because they haven't even heard of these institutions, and they don't come up in the typical litany of bad organizations in the same way that the Democrats or the socialists or the UN or any of these other kind of descriptors. And so we don't really have the categories and institutional understanding to approach the problem as it exists at this stage.
Ignorance is a problem across the board. Used to be rationally ignorant to not pay attention to politics, but the negative ramifications of being ignorant, willfully, rationally ignorant, they're changing. That dynamic is changing. It's almost not rational any longer to be ignorant of politics. But unfortunately, not everybody has the time or energy or the career to spend as much time as we all do trying to figure this stuff out. I feel bad for people who are just at home working, coming home from work at 6:30, having dinner with their kids, and then no time but to just tuck them in. Who's got time to research all this crap and figure out the truth? It's those people that we need to wake up somehow. Those people that we need to wake up, I think it's going to happen through critical race theory in the schools, I think is going to be one of the key vectors in doing that. But Dave, what do you think about this? And what do you think about the censorship issue, the alignment issue? How do we break free what looks like a giant heavy blanket coming to smother us from all sides? What do we do about that?
Right. Well, what Darren said was really important, really very, very important. And when you have folks who are screaming about the importance of the kind of post-war liberal international order, it's these it's these things that they're really talking about. I have a name for some of this. This is, I call it like the NGO archipelago. And of course, it encompasses more than NGOs. I mean, we're in a place now where, if you follow what woke capital has been doing, you've got sort of the business end, and then you've also got the business corporate end, and then you've also got a myriad of interlocking non-governmental organizations and nonprofits that are sort of pushing the same kind of ideological line on a variety of issues. And what I tell people is, like, for example, there are people who wake up every day. There are thousands of folks who wake up every day, and their job is to advance these things. What we'll say, like we'll say, like the kind of ethos of decadent early 21st century globalism. For lack of a better word, and those of us who are sort of fighting back against that, we're bloggers, we're pundits, we make YouTube videos, we don't have the advantage of massive institutions. We can't go and press a button and put tens or hundreds or thousands of, let's say, content creators and writers all on different beats. They can afford, as Darren has dealt with. Actually, probably all of us here on this call have dealt with folks whose mission it is just to sort of put a target on our backs and to defame us and unperson us in an attempt to shut down our voices. We, on the other side, we don't have that kind of infrastructure, and this is always something I'm coming back to, hammering on the infrastructure point. As has been said, an army marches on its stomach, and that means, in our context, that means that if you want to, create change in a positive way, and do some of the things like this, like what we've been talking about, for example, Texas, and its sort of state level efforts towards internet censorship. These types of things aren't magic bullets, and they require massive infrastructure of people waking up in the morning and having their job as to advance these ideas over a course of years or decades. This is what the left has been able to do globally, and we need to get in the game. I think it's we're in the situation we're in primarily as a result of our frankly of our donors on the right, and folks who just do not want to support paying for the soldiers to be out in the field fighting.
One of the things I keep thinking about as all this comes up is like, what is the coalition of the future? Do we need to grow the coalition? What faction out there can we bring into the fold? Who's close enough to us in the Venn diagram to expand the tent? I always felt like Trump was a big tent kind of guy. Like, he brought in a lot of different groups that had some commonalities but had a lot of differences. What does the tent look like, Will, if we're going to expand the base? What factions, what issues, what groups? Are there people in the middle? Are there people on the edges? Is there somebody that we can bring in through policy approach or attitude? How do we grow the coalition?
I mean, to me, it's like Trump already showed the basic approach to solving this problem. We won the election in 2016. We won it with the Rust Belt. We won it with, I think even Jack talked about it. Like, generally, the idea is we need to be moving to the center on economics. The left keep doing crazy stuff and seems to keep getting crazier. And I think, I've seen a lot. I mean, so that's how you do it. You peel off the people who get tired of the woke stuff, and while still, not going back to Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney and all that nonsense. I want to kind of push back slightly. I think there's a little too much pessimism about the social media censorship effort, and I think it's for while I generally am in agreement, like the problem, we have the uniparty issue, where you have the tech companies as instruments of the federal state apparatus, et cetera. This is an issue that the ball has moved dramatically quickly in the course of about 3 to 4 years. I mean, you think about 2017, 2018, it was starting to percolate online as an idea. And now 2020, we've got state level legislation effectively, and this in the face of a conservative movement that for 20 years has said, let private companies do what they want. How dare you think about regulating it? I mean, I remember my original idea, I put this out 2 years ago, and I was seen as fringe for saying that we should have a civil rights law, and that we should be protecting people's right to speak. Now it's mainstream. I'm more optimistic, and part of the reason I think is that there's more division. I mean, this is actually a place where you have division between the elected officials and the tech companies in a really big way. I mean, Donald Trump was censored, and the reaction to that was not just here, but also like Mexico, Germany, France, all of them coming out and saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. You guys don't get to censor public officials. This is a matter of sovereignty in a sense." So I think that there's a willingness on the part of elected officials, especially because their personal interests are so dramatically under threat from censorship, that, you know, even if the bureaucracy might be like, whoa, 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 we need to work with the tech companies, blah, 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 the elected officials might say, no, 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 this is the spot where I'm overruling you guys. They don't get to censor us anymore. That's like, we're gonna stop that, because I've felt the brunt of it personally. And I think that, you know, rather than getting like too, I mean, I want to be sanguine about this specific piece of legislation, because there are definitely legal issues that it faces, as we talked about, but I don't want to be super sanguine about the fight over social media censorship generally. I think this is one of those fights that we actually could win before, you know, massively overhauling, you know, the deep state, and changing everything, because it's a fight where, you know, there's a lot of people who are directly impacted by it, including politicians and elected officials who saw what happened to Trump. And, you know, we keep pushing on it. It's a really, really good, I think, you know, if you're looking for like leading wedge issues to try and really push and actually make a difference, I think this is actually one of them where you really could, in a way that you probably, you know, there's others where it's going to be a lot more challenging.
Indeed. Darren, what do you think about that? How do we expand the base? What issues can we pick up or react to will, or what do you think? How are we gonna grow this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I never want to be one to douse optimism, even if I think it's not terribly justified. But I guess if I had to do that, I would say that, yes, I mean, it's a great thing that this is an issue that's more widely understood and people are talking about it and legislation's proposed. But I think it's again, it gets to that bottleneck between everybody wants something, therefore we're going to get it. There's clearly a kind of roadblock between the public wanting stuff, or even office holders claiming that they'll advocate for things, and that actually cashing out as legislation that works. And so that's where I think kind of the bottlenecks really exist. I think it's great that a lot of people are talking about it. People are exploring options, but really it's a messy machine. And to get out on the other side to the point where you're really, you know, keeping these tech companies under heel is another thing. And it's a slightly different issue what you see with the kind of, you know, it is a big thing. All these other countries were really upset and terrified that effectively the American regime, that is to say the bureaucracy, censored a sitting president at the time off of their platform. But I think what the meaning of that is that other countries saw, look, precisely because these tech platforms are an extension of the national security state. This wasn't this wasn't some rogue thing. This was the tech companies as an extension of the security state, acting on the interests and will of the security state in their deplatforming of Donald Trump. And so what these foreign countries saw was, they say, wow, this is a dangerous precedent precisely because we're going to see the United States exercise its tentacles, this big tech tentacles, as an instrument of geopolitics. So, for instance, are they going to deplatform Merkel or the new Chancellor of Germany if he doesn't play ball on Nord Stream 2? And they explicitly said, but we basically want the right to censor, to decide. We want to censor. We just don't want it to be these American companies censoring. And so when you tease out the actual interests and nature of the objections, I think it points less in the direction of some kind of robust anti-censorship coalition, rather than a lot of people do hate these big tech companies for sure. But whether or not that translates into a free speech anti-censorship policy as the end result, that's what I'm less optimistic about. Well, in fact, one thing that I would love to encourage, I don't know if any, I love all people, but including Chinese people, including Russians and others, is, it sounds like a ridiculous idea, but what if the Chinese were to say, look, why don't we just set up we set up a big like server farm for American conservatives, political dissidents. They'll say, guess what, guys? I'm sorry. I know you're not allowed to talk about Xi. You're not allowed to talk about the Uyghurs. But guess what? You're allowed to talk about all the things that actually matter to your country that your big tech companies won't let you do. China should set up the server farm and absolutely give the United States the humiliation it deserves, because we're no better than them when it comes to free speech. They should absolutely humiliate us. And if they don't do it, Russia should do it.
Will Chamberlain?
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think, and I think Darren makes a good point too about the fact that like the interests of Merkel and Macron, like they still want censorship. They just don't want themselves to be censored, right? They live in countries where free speech and norms in general are much stricter than they are here. That said, I'm still gonna be the optimist here. I still think even in the absence of support from Merkel or Macron, there's enough momentum behind this one to make it the right wedge issue to push.